All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amber Hay. I recently joined the Office of the Student Loan Advocate as the new Public Service Loan Forgiveness Advocate, or PSLF advocate. I'm joined today by my co-presenter, Jessica. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Manfredi. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the student loan advocate here in the Office of the Student Loan Advocate. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Amber.
All right. Well, as you may all have already seen, today we're here to speak with you about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Our goal is hopefully to demystify the application process to help you get your federal student loans forgiven. Some of you may already know quite a bit about PSLF, and others may just be getting started. Wherever you're at in that journey, you're not alone. Millions of Washingtonians are also impacted by student loan debt. Our hope here is that by the end of the presentation, you'll feel better about your knowledge, have an idea about your next steps, and feel more comfortable navigating your resources. Before we dive into material, we do have a few housekeeping items. As you may have already seen, the presentation is being recorded and will be posted onto the Student Loan Advocate webpage. We'll provide our slides for reference following the presentation so you can have access to all of the links. It may take us a week or so to get those materials posted and emailed out to the attendees. So just keep that in mind. The chat function back up. It technically is not disabled. We'll be using it as panelists to share links and resources throughout the presentation. Folks are on mute as we've got over 100 folks with us today. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A function and the upvote function to upvote questions that you want to have answered live. There's like a thumbs up icon under each question, and we are going to have time for that Q&A at the end. We also have live closed captions for you that you can enable on your own Zoom icons.
And let me just make sure that those closed captions are enabled, because I don't think I did that before we started. So are you seeing them on your end, the option, Amber? And sorry to throw a wrench in the process.
Yes, I see them on
okay,
my
perfect.
end.
Perfect. Just want to make sure that it's it's working for the folks that may need that. Okay, perfect.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to give you an overview of how PSLF relates to the student loan debt crisis by providing some key data points specific to Washington state borrowers. We're also going to cover some of Washington state's response to the crisis. We're then going to shift gears and talk about how to qualify and apply for PSLF. And we'll talk about the specifics of recent federal rule changes, as well as some limited time opportunities to earn more PSLF qualifying payments. Lastly, we'll provide some additional resources and information about how to get individual support to help you in pursuing student loan forgiveness. Here is a snapshot of what student loan debt looks like for Washington state. These numbers are accurate as of March 2024. We have over 790,000 federal student loan borrowers in our state with an outstanding federal debt balance of about $28.7 billion. That puts our average federal student loan debt to about $32,000 per borrower. These numbers here are not really to intimidate anyone. We're just trying to normalize that student debt is really common. We know that folks can have shame or negative feelings or emotions that are brought up when we're talking about student loan debt and finances. So we just want to drive that point home that it is normal. Millions of people have it here in the state, a little bit less than that, but overall millions right across the US. So there's nothing to be ashamed about when it comes to dealing with student loans. So what exactly is PSLF? The Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program is a federal program that forgives the remaining balance on your direct loans after you've made 120 qualifying monthly payments, which is approximately 10 years, under a qualifying repayment plan while working full-time for an eligible public service employer. In a few minutes, we're going to dive into each of those PSLF components in more detail. But first, Jessica's going to give you some key information on how PSLF has affected our Washington State borrowers.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about how does PSLF look like in Washington State. So if you have heard that not a lot of people have received forgiveness through PSLF, I'm here to really dispel some of those rumors up front. While it is true that when this program was first started, the eligibility criteria to qualify for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was complex, and it led to a lot of low approval rates for individuals who would otherwise qualify. The PSLF program was implemented in 2007. So the first group of folks that became eligible was in 2017. Between fall 2017 and October of 2020, 31% of the forms that were submitted were denied. However, in recent years, federal level updates have made the program easier to access, which has significantly increased the overall percentage of accepted forms. Between November of 2020 and June of 2023, only 7% of the forms have been denied, meaning that 93% of the forms that were submitted were approved and successfully processed. I also want to highlight that people in Washington State are benefiting from the PSLF program, and that more folks every day are having their student loans forgiven. This data is all from the Department of Education website, so that, as you can see, in March of 2022, there were over 3,000 folks that had processed PSLF discharges. And then as of March of 2024, that number has increased to over 19,000 borrowers in the state of Washington that have now received forgiveness under the PSLF program. It translates to roughly $1.2 billion of that has been forgiven through the PSLF program for borrowers in our state. I want to share this data with you just to demonstrate that this program is really working. And I understand that it can be confusing and really challenging to get all the paperwork together and deal with student loan servicers, but it can really pay off, as it has paid off for thousands of folks in our state. And you may be asking yourself, if we're talking primarily here about a federal student loan debt in a federal program, right, PSLF, why are state employees here speaking with you today? Well, I will be the first one to tell you that we are very fortunate to live in a state that is in many ways leading the charge in state-led level work to address the student loan debt crisis. So we have a law here in Washington State that's called the Student Loan Bill of Rights, which was passed in 2018. This law created the Office of the Student Loan Advocate within the Washington Student Achievement Council, also known as WASAC. It also allows our state to enforce state consumer protection laws against student loan servicers, and it also requires the servicers to notify borrowers annually about the Student Loan Advocate's office and have information on how you can contact us on their website. Most importantly, it allows borrowers like you to submit questions and complaints directly to the Office of the Student Loan Advocate and to get individual assistance when needed in resources for your student loans. I will share with you information at the end of the presentation on how you can contact our office. In March of 2022, Washington State passed legislation that was called Engrossed Substitute Senate Bill 5847. This bill required the Office of Financial Management to partner with our office, the Office of the Student Loan Advocate, to increase awareness about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. The legislation built upon this existing legislation through House Bill 1950, which passed in March of 2024, so just this past March. As a result of these bills, we have been working with state agencies to implement a PSLF employment certification program. We have also been directing agencies to send the awareness materials that our office has developed to help educate people on how to access this program, which is part of why we're here speaking with you all today. And we're also working on a legislative plan for a PSLF statewide initiative to raise awareness and remove barriers for all public service employees to access the PSLF program. So those of you that are like working at nonprofits or local government, right, which is going to be due to the legislature on December 1st, 2024. And if you'd like to help Washington State continue to address the barriers that to PSLF and expand access through the program. We invite you to complete a short survey to share information regarding your experience and challenges in accessing the PSLF program. The survey should only take you about 10 minutes to answer. It's only about 10 questions. It's multiple choice. So hopefully it won't take you a lot of time to complete. You can use the QR code on the screen to access the survey. And if you don't know how to use a QR code, you can basically get your phone out and you can use your camera to point it towards the QR code. And it's going to show you a link that you can click on, and it's going to take you directly to that survey website. Otherwise, if that sounds too complicated to you, Amber is also going to post a link to the survey on the chat for you to access, just so that you are aware. You don't have to complete this right now, because obviously we want you to pay attention to the presentation, but we wanted to make sure that you are aware that we're collecting your input and would love to have your voice heard as we are planning this initiative. All right, and I'll pass back to Amber.
Great. So now that you know a little bit more about the PSLF program and the opportunity it provides and how it relates to our state, you might be asking yourself, how do I qualify for the PSLF program and how to get my loans actually forgiven? So we're going to go ahead and dive into the meat of that right now. To break it down, there are 4 elements or components that you need for PSLF. Okay. The first is the right type of employment. The second is the right type of student loan. Third, the right type of repayment plan. And 4, the right number of total payments. So we're going to review each of these components in more depth. And let's dive in. So first, what is considered qualifying employment for the PSLF program? Employment for PSLF needs to be an average of at least 30 hours per week. This can be at one full-time public service job or multiple part-time jobs that meet that 30-hour requirement combined, as long as both of those positions are with qualifying public service employers. You must be directly employed by the qualifying public employer, as in your W-2 comes from them. This means that most contractors will not qualify. However, an exception does exist if you work in a state that has laws that prevent an otherwise qualifying employer from hiring employees directly to fill positions or provide services. An example of a group of people that would likely qualify under this particular exception are public defense attorneys, who must be hired as contractors due to state law. Public employer, public service employer, means any level of government. That can be tribal, local, state, federal, etc., or a nonprofit organization. And the slide has a little bit more detail on those nonprofit types. The role or position that you hold within any of those organizations does not matter. It just matters if your employer is a qualifying public service employer, and your hours, of course, and you need to be employed at the time that you apply for forgiveness. This is really important. So if you at some point when you're ready for forgiveness and you've reached all of the requirements and you plan to then leave public service, you want to make sure that you've applied and received forgiveness before leaving public service. It is important to note that labor unions or partisan political organizations are not eligible for PSLF. That doesn't mean that you can't be represented by a labor union. You just cannot be directly employed by a union. If you're not sure if your employer qualifies, stay tuned. We're going to cover some more resources on that.
All right, so now we're going to talk about which federal student loans are eligible for forgiveness through the PSLF program. Eligible loans for PSLF include all types of direct loans, whether that is a subsidized or an unsubsidized loan, and it also includes Grad Plus loans, Parent Plus loans, and consolidated direct loans. All other loans that are not circled in this slide on the green squares, right, including Perkins loans and FFEL loans, are only eligible once you consolidate them into a direct consolidation loan. Please note that the Perkins loans and FFEL loans are not considered direct loans, and that they have both been discontinued at this time, meaning you can't take out any new Perkins or FFEL loans. So just to reiterate, both Perkins and Federal Family Education or FFEL loans are not eligible for forgiveness under PSLF unless you consolidate them into a direct consolidation loan. Parent Plus loans are in their own category because even though they are considered direct loans, you may need to consolidate them if you would like to gain access to an income-driven repayment plan, which is typically the type of plan that is most beneficial for most borrowers in PSLF to be under. If you have a Parent Plus loan and you're pursuing PSLF, I recommend that you read the section on our website called PSLF and Direct Parent Plus loans to better understand your options for repayment. And I will have Amber post a link to our PSLF website for that information for Parent Plus loans, as well as a link on how you can consolidate your loans if you are in one of these situations where your loans need to be consolidated. So at this point, you may be wondering, how do I check which type of federal student loans I have, right? I'm not sure if I have any of those FFEL Perkins loans, right? So you can log in into your studentaid.gov to locate your federal student loan information, including the type of loan that you have, your loan balance, and your loan servicer. Amber is gonna once again drop the link to studentaid.gov to our chat. To log in, you will go to the right corner of the page and it will ask you for your federal student aid ID, your FSA ID. This is your username and password for this website. If you don't happen to have one, right, you can also click to create an account next to the login button. Once you log in, it will bring you to a dashboard. And on the right side of this dashboard, you will be able to view your loan servicer information under My Loan Servicer. If you click on the link under My Loan Servicer, where it says View More, you will be brought to a page with your servicer's website, phone number, and other contact information like mailing address. It's a good idea to view your loan servicer details because while it is uncommon, you may actually have more than one servicer. This is a dashboard that will also show you key information about your federal student loans. If you want a comprehensive breakdown of all your loans, you will want to click on the View Details button on the right side of My Aid, and it will bring you to a page listing all of the aid you've received, including both grants and loans. The breakdown of all your loans will include the type of loan that you have, your balances, and interest rates for each individual loan. Okay, so once you have confirmed that you have the right type of employment and the right type of loans, the next thing that you want to do is make sure that you're on the right type of repayment plan. Any of the income-driven repayment plans, which are also known as IDR, are eligible for PSLF. These IDR plans include the income-based repayment plan, or IDR, the pay-as-you-earn, PAYE, Saving on Available Education, SAVE, which was formerly known as the Repayee Plan, and the Income Contingent Repayment Plan, ICR. It's important to know that the pay-as-you-earn, the pay plan will not be available for new enrollments after July 1st of 2024. And if you're in that plan, you're going to be able to stay on that plan. You're just not going to be able to enroll in it if you haven't enrolled in it already after July 1st. And then Income Contingent Repayment Plan, ICR, it's only going to be available after July 1st for folks with direct consolidated loans that include Parent Plus loans. And you also have the 10-year standard repayment plan, which is the plan that you usually get placed under automatically when you graduate if you don't do anything to choose a different plan. You typically do not want to repay your loan on the 10-year standard repayment plan if you're pursuing PSLF, because you will likely pay off the entire loan balance before you actually become eligible for forgiveness. Some periods on the standard repayment plan are okay, as long as you also have either some periods under an IDR plan or periods of eligible forbearances and deferments on your loans. So repayment plans that typically do not make you eligible for PSLF include the 30-year standard repayment plan, which is available for consolidated loans, as well as any graduated and extended repayment plans. There is a limited time exception to this that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So like if you've been in these plans in the past, there's an opportunity currently for you still to get credit for those past payments. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the presentation. You can get help picking an eligible PSLF repayment plan using the income-driven repayment or IDR application. The IDR application will ask you to log in with your FSA ID username and password, and it will pull your actual student loan data, balances, etc., and ask you questions about your household income, your household size, tax filing status, etc. And based on that information, it will calculate for you an estimated monthly payment under different income-driven repayment plans. So it's a really useful tool to help you choose the best repayment plan for you if you're choosing to pursue PSLF. Please note that the IDR application process will show you your repayment options and in an estimate of those options before you actually submit that application, right? And you can leave the application at any time and return to it. So by starting the process, you get to see what your estimates are. But if you're not ready to pick a repayment plan, you can exit the application before you submit the application fully. As a good rule of thumb, usually the lowest monthly payment available for an IDR for you under an IDR plan is going to maximize the forgiveness that you get at the end with PSLF. And I'm going to say that again. Usually, the IDR plan with the lowest monthly payment available to you is going to maximize the amount of forgiveness that you get under PSLF. The exception to this rule would be if your lowest IDR plan payment is higher than what you would pay under the 10-year standard repayment plan. In that case, then the 10-year standard repayment plan may be a better option for you. Please note that our office does not estimate monthly payments for borrowers, so please use the IDR application if you need assistance with picking a repayment plan that is both eligible for PSLF and best fits your needs. And I'm going to have Amber post the link to the IDR application on the chat so you can check that out if you would like to.
Great, thank you, Jessica. I know that there's a lot of information, so bear with us here. To recap so far, you have to have the right type of employment, the right type of loan, and the right type of repayment plan. The last piece that you need is to make 120 qualifying payments. And so, what payments actually count towards that 120 needed for PSLF? All 120 payments must be made well under a qualifying repayment plan, with the exceptions we'll note in a little bit, and for the full amount due as shown on your bill. This includes $0 payments for those who qualify under an IDR plan. So again, if you are on an IDR plan and your payment is $0, as long as you're employed full-time in a qualifying employer, you can count that month towards PSLF. So yes, $0 payments can count. The only time that these rules don't apply is if you're under one of the accepted types of deferments or forbearances at any time during that month. We'll review those in a minute. Payments also need to be made after October 1st, 2007, because that is when the PSLF program started. So even if you were employed in public service and were repaying on your loans before October 1st, 2007, those previous payments would not be eligible, only payments starting October 1st, 2007 moving forward. The payments do not need to be made consecutively or with the same student loan servicer or while you work at the same employer. You could theoretically work at 10 different employers in 10 years, and if they're all qualifying public service employers, you could count that employment. One tip is to make sure that you're making on-time and complete payments. In order to do that, signing up for the automatic debit or auto pay with your loan servicer can help you to make sure that you're meeting those requirements. It is important to keep in mind that there are times where you cannot make qualifying payments. So you can only make qualifying payments during periods where you have a payment due. This means that you can't make a qualifying payment while you have an in-school status or in your grace period, which is usually 6 months after you graduate or stop attending school at least half time, and in certain types of deferment or forbearances. Payments made during those periods would not be considered qualifying for PSLF, even if you were employed by a public service employer. You can, in some cases, decline in-school deferment for previous loans. If you return to school, for example, to get a master's degree, you can decline in-school deferment for your undergraduate loans that you already have and continue to make qualifying payments on those loans. However, you would not be able to decline your in-school deferment for new loans that you would receive for that graduate education. This slide shows different types of deferments and forbearances that actually can count as qualifying payments if you were employed an average of 30 hours a week at a qualifying employer during that period. Most of them are self-explanatory, like cancer treatment, economic hardship deferment, or military service. And note that like economic hardship deferment is a specific type of deferment that you would have to apply for through your servicer. Other types of deferment are maybe a little bit less known, or forbearances, such as the administrative forbearance due to a local or national emergency, or the administrative forbearance for collecting supporting documentation from a borrower, such as when you apply for an income-driven repayment plan. All of these types of deferment and forbearances on the slide count as qualifying payments, even though you're technically not paying anything during these periods. Another type of qualifying forbearance is the COVID-19 administrative forbearance. This was also known as the payment pause, which the U.S. Department of Education automatically applied to direct and other Department of Education held loans due to the COVID-19 emergency between March 13th, 2020 and August 31st, 2023. These periods under the payment pause will count as PSLF qualifying payments, even if you did not submit payments during that time, as long as you were working full-time for a qualifying public service employer. That's always going to be the key thing, right? Making sure that it's during a period where you are working for that qualifying public service employer. Note that if you were in an in-school status or grace period during the COVID administrative forbearance, your non-payments during that time would not count as qualifying payments, even if you were working full-time, and that would be because of that in-school or grace period status.
Thank you, Amber. And the Department of Education started implementing PSLF regulations, new PSLF regulations that went into effect on July 1st of 2023, which I know now sounds like it's almost a year ago, but people still don't know about these changes. So that's why we're making sure that we're sharing with you that information today. That relaxes some of the previous rules, that making the program a little bit easier for borrowers to access. We've covered some of those changes already, but I just want to highlight those changes for you, just to make sure that you are aware of them. There is now a single standard for full-time employment, as an average of 30 hours per week. So before, employment for PSLF was primarily defined by the employer's definition of full-time, which is typically 40 hours or more a week. So now you can actually work less hours, 30 or more, and still qualify for PSLF. The new rules also require employers to give adjunct and part-time faculty credit of at least 3.35 of work for every credit hour taught for PSLF. And while we had made this change in Washington State through ESSB 5847, the law that I was talking about earlier today, this rule is now nationwide, right? So it applies to everybody in the United States, and can help part-time faculty across the nation. The new regulation also allows public employers to certify employment for certain non-direct employees, like contractors, if that individual provides a service that by state law cannot be performed by a direct employee. Now, we're also able to permanently count certain periods of deferment and forbearance, the ones that Amber just went over, towards PSLF. And then there's a few more. Borrowers may now receive PSLF credit on payments that are made late, installments, or in a lump sum. Before, only on-time payments counted. And borrowers will now receive a weighted average of existing qualifying payments towards PSLF if they consolidate their direct loans starting July 2024. Previously, when you consolidated your loans, you could lose all of your PSLF qualifying payments and the progress that you had made towards forgiveness. This rule is a little bit different for anybody who's consolidating before the end of this month, so before June 30th, 2024, and we're going to talk about that in detail in a future slide. And federal student aid has also made available what's called a buyback option for certain periods of forbearance and deferment that are ineligible for PSLF. Right. So if you had a period in the past of forbearance and deferment that maybe didn't count, you might have an option to get them to count through this buyback program. I'll have Amber share the link for that on the chat so that you can take a look at that. The Department of Education is asking that people wait until the IDR account adjustment, which we're going to talk about more in a little bit, is completed before buying back any periods. And right now, the Department of Education is estimating that that adjustment is going to be completed by the end of September. So you probably don't want to be doing any buyback before then. I do want to highlight that the buyback option will not be available for periods of in-school deferment and grace periods. Finally, FSA has also formalized the reconsideration process for PSLF. So for example, if after all the PSLF payments that you have received after submitting your paperwork are counted, you disagree with the number of payments that you have received as a result, there's a formal way now for you to ask FSA to review your account again and see if any mistakes were made and potentially award you with additional qualifying payments. Now, I would like to highlight some important changes regarding how the PSLF program is going to be managed from now on. While historically, the PSLF program has been managed by a single servicer like FedLoan and more recently MOHELA, as of May 1st of 2024, the PSLF program will no longer be managed through a designated loan servicer. Federal Student Aid, also known as FSA, will fully manage these programs through studentaid.gov. Beginning on May 1st, 2024, you will no longer be able to access your PSLF progress, certified employment information, or payment counts on the MOHELA's borrower portal. Your information is moving to studentaid.gov, and it will be available based on the information that FSA has provided so far. So it could be that it's a little bit after this. It will be available after the processing pause ends in July, right, of 2024. In the future, you will be able to submit your PSLF forms on studentaid.gov, track your progress towards PSLF on your studentaid.gov, and get support for these programs through FSA's contact centers. Between May through June of 2024, FSA will pause processing any forms for PSLF, right? So if you have submitted any forms starting on May 1st and you continue to submitting now until June, do know that there's going to be a pause and those forms are not going to be processed yet. You can continue to submit those PSLF forms, but they're going to be on a hold, basically, and not processed until July. If you submit a form during the pause, we're asking, and also FSA is asking, that you do not resubmit when the processing resumes in July, because doing so could cause delays with your submission. And I'm going to have Amber post a link in the chat that talks a little bit more about this transition in case you want to learn more details.
All right, thank you, Jessica. And just as a reminder, please do keep putting those questions in the chat. We're going to have time at the end to go over, or excuse me, not in the chat, in the Q&A function. I've seen some good ones in there already, so I'm excited that we'll have a chance to address some of those. So do stay tuned. All right, so now that we've gone over all of the components of the PSLF program, you might be asking yourself, what's the process to actually apply and get your loans forgiven? When you're ready to apply for PSLF, you can use the PSLF help tool on studentaid.gov to generate and digitally sign your PSLF form. This form is used to certify your employment and to apply for the PSLF program. There's a new DocuSign feature within this PSLF help tool that allows you as a borrower and your employer to digitally sign the PSLF form. The tool will then automatically submit the digitally signed PSLF form to federal student aid for processing. If you've applied before and used a paper form is still available, but we generally want to discourage folks from using it because the PSLF help tool helps to prevent some of the most common errors that people were making on those forms or seeing on those forms. If you did do the paper form, you would need to either fax or mail it, so it is a lot more difficult to track its progress. Submitting the form on the PSLF help tool actually allows you to track the form while it processes on the federal student aid website. In general, it's best practice to submit the PSLF form every year, whenever you switch employment and whenever you switch between full and part-time employment with the same employer. This will help you evaluate your eligibility on a yearly basis and adds to your number of qualifying payments. You also can go and submit forms for previous employers as well, even if you're no longer working for them. The main reason that you don't want to wait till you're 10 until you submit all your forms is because it can be difficult to track down the prior employers to certify employment. So you want to do it the sooner, the better. And also if there is something wrong, like maybe you're in an incorrect repayment plan, you might not find out about that information too late if you wait and do just one form at the very end of 10 years. So we recommend submitting the form every year whenever you switch employers. And I would say, you know, the best way to get an accurate payment count is to get those forms submitted. All right, here is the link to the PSLF help tool. Jessica, if you'll go ahead and post that. Key pieces of information you're going to need when you go into the help tool, and you can start a PSLF form and come back to it within studentaid.gov, but you are going to need your employer's federal identification number, or EIN. That should be on your W-2. If you don't know it, you can contact your employer or HR office to get assistance in identifying that number. You want your dates of employment when you started and your employer's PSLF contact email address. One kind of note here, if you don't remember the exact day that you started, put down as close as you think, and your employer has the opportunity to go back in and can correct that date based on their records if they see that it's inaccurate. If you've worked for Washington state agencies or public institutions of higher education, right? So like the University of Washington, for instance, you can use our PSLF directory that's through the Office of Financial Management to find the correct email address of the PSLF contact for that agency, as well as the agency's employee identification number. So if you're looking for that information, again, from either Washington state agencies or public institutions of higher education, that link is going to be a great resource for you. And I think Jessica just dropped it in the chat, or will here in a second. All right, once your form is processed and your eligibility determined, you'll be able to view eligible and qualifying PSLF payments on the studentaid.gov. And again, that's going to be after the processing payment pause, processing pause for PSLF forms. You'll also have enhanced self-service tools, including program dashboards and status tracking for your forms and applications. Please do note that even though the PSLF information will be on your studentaid.gov, you'll continue to make payments to your current loan servicer. And I'll hand it back to Jessica.
Perfect. Thank you, Amber. Lots of changes happening. So you, like Amber said, your PSLF information is going to be available on studentaid.gov starting in July. But everything else, like your payments, income driven repayments applications, that's going to be still with the servicer that you're currently with. So it's important to know where each information is going to leave. Now, I want to mention a special opportunity that we've been kind of talking about, but we haven't really given you details on, that is going on right now that may allow you to get extra PSLF qualifying payments and potentially reach forgiveness faster that is known as the IDR one-time account adjustment or the payment count adjustment. So the Department of Education created this IDR account adjustment to basically try and correct for those borrowers who were unnecessarily steered into forbearances and deferments when they could actually have qualified for an income-driven repayment plan in the past and made some type of progress towards forgiveness. And the payment adjustment is important to know that that this is a limited time opportunity available right now for borrowers to potentially get closer to forgiveness. And it will be applied to all Department of Education held loans between now and September of 2024, as of right now, because they've been pushing that deadline. So we have to be cognizant of that. But as of right now, September, right? And it will be applied to all Department of Education held loans between now and September 2024. This adjustment is going to allow for certain periods of forbearance and or deferments to convert into IDR payments, right? Which can count towards forgiveness. For borrowers with 12 or more consecutive months of forbearance, 36 or more total months of forbearance, months spent in economic hardship and military deferments after 2013, and periods of deferment before 2013, excluding in-school deferments, right? So in-school deferments are not going to count, neither will grace periods. Any time spent in repayment, right? So even if you're not in an IDR plan at that point in time, right, will convert into IDR payments, including any payments that you may have made prior to consolidating any loans, if applicable, if you ever consolidated. But it does unfortunately exclude periods of bankruptcy and default, right? So if you had those periods in your history, unfortunately, those periods are not going to be converted into IDR payments. And any borrowers who have accumulated eligible time in repayment from 20 to 25 years will see automatic forgiveness, even if they are not enrolled in an IDR plan and or plan on applying for PSLF, right? So if for those borrowers that have been in repayment for a really long time, 20 to 25 years, they might actually see forgiveness without having to do anything, right? And they don't necessarily need to be enrolled in PSLF to qualify. Now, any additional IDR payments, and this is important for people that are working towards PSLF, may count as PSLF qualifying payments, right? Because when we're pursuing PSLF, IDR is a component of it, but what we really want is PSLF qualifying payments, right? To get to that 120. Will count if you were employed in a qualifying public sector employer during that period of new converted IDR payments that you get as a result of the adjustment. Loans that hit the forgiveness thresholds, whether that is 240 to 300 payments for IDR forgiveness or 120 qualifying payments for PSLF forgiveness, are already starting to be forgiven and will continue to be forgiven as the adjustment continues to be applied. It is important for you to know that final IDR and PSLF credits, once again, may not be applied for some people until later in 2024, right? So even though this is something that's happening right now, it could take some time for that to be applied to your account. While most people will get this payment adjustment applied to their account automatically, I also really want to highlight, and this is very important, that there are some people that, depending on their circumstances, they may need to act right before that June 30th, 2024 deadline to take advantage of this opportunity. For example, if you have commercially held Perkins or FFEL or HEAL loans, you will need to consolidate your loans before that deadline. If you want to learn more in-depth information about the IDR account adjustment, I really encourage you to watch our recorded webinar on this topic that really breaks it down, in details. I'll have Amber post the link to that presentation in the chat for you. Just be aware that in the presentation, we were talking about the deadline being April 30th, right? Because when we recorded that webinar, that's what the deadline was. But since then, it has changed. So what we mean now, every time you hear April 30th on that webinar, because I say it over and over, just know that I mean June 30th, right? Due to these updates that have happened at the federal level to give borrowers more time to consolidate. Now, I highly recommend that everyone investigate a little bit more about the adjustment. because it really could make a difference when it comes to achieving eventual forgiveness on your loans, whether that is through the PSLF program or for those folks that have been in repayment for quite some time through IDR forgiveness. And because I just mentioned consolidation, I do want to spend a little bit more time talking about that, because you may be asking yourself, who are those people that really truly can benefit from consolidating their loans before June 30th of 2024? So there's 3 groups of people that should strongly consider consolidating their loans before June 30th, including, again, if you have any commercially held FFEL loans, Perkins loans, or health education loans, health education assistant loans, known as HEAL loans, right? Once again, if you're not sure if you have any of these loans, go to the studentaid.gov website, and it's going to tell you that information there, right? The loans that are considered commercially held, they're going to appear just under a servicer name. Okay, so be aware of that. If it says that you have one of these commercially held loans, you definitely want to be consolidating before the June 30th deadline. Now, if you have Department of Education held FEL, right, Perkins or HEAL loans, you may want to still consolidate so that you can qualify those for PSLF, right? These loans are going to be listed as Department of Ed / the servicer name on your studentaid.gov account, right? So that's how you identify those. Even if they're owned by the Department of Education, you still need to do that additional step of consolidating, again, FFEL, Perkins, or HEAL, because they need to be direct loans, right, in order to be considered for PSLF. So if you're in that situation and you want to qualify for PSLF, again, you need to make sure that you consolidate before June 30th, 2024. And then finally, right, the group of people that really could benefit from consolidating is people who have loans with different periods in repayment, okay? This is more common for people that went back to school, right, one time or multiple times, and took breaks in between the periods of time that they went to school when they would have entered repayment. For example, someone who got their undergraduate degree, then they stopped attending school, they took a break for a year or so, and then they began a graduate degree, a year later. So they probably would have entered repayment during that 1 year pause. In this example, this person would have potentially more IDR payments on their undergraduate loan versus their graduate loans. So people in this situation could benefit from consolidating before June 30th, 2024, because the new consolidated loan would have the same number of qualifying payments as the undergraduate loans, which, in the example that we gave, would have a higher payment count. So if you apply to consolidate your loans between now and June 30th of 2024, you will not lose your PSLF or IDR credit due to this adjustment. I'm going to say this once again. If you apply to consolidate your loans between now and June 30th, you're not going to lose your PSLF or IDR credit because of the adjustment, okay? This is important for people to know, because in the past, there was a lot of messaging that if you were to consolidate your loans, you could lose your progress towards forgiveness. And even the consolidation application today, if you go in there, it might still have a mention about that, right? They haven't updated that information in the consolidation application. So just be aware to just ignore that. As long as you submit the application before June 30th, 2024, you're not going to lose any of that, the credit that you have, whether that's towards PSLF or IDR, okay? And right now, if you consolidate your loans, any type of loans, including the Perkins, FEL, or direct loans, your new direct consolidation, like I was explaining earlier, as a general rule of thumb, will be credited with at least the same number of qualifying payment as your oldest loan, or the loan that has the highest number of qualifying payments, right? And I already gave an example of that. But for example, if you have an older subsidized loan from an undergraduate degree with 80 qualifying payments, and a new subsidized loan from your graduate degree with 60 qualifying payments, your new consolidated loan, again, if you apply to consolidate by June 30th of 2024, would have at least 80 qualifying payments, putting all of those loans in the same timeline for forgiveness, right? And if you do consolidate your loans between now and June 30th of 2024, it is also important for you to know that your PSLF payment counts may temporarily reset to 0, okay? So this means that you could get a letter, or maybe when you log in into your student.gov account, after you consolidate, you may see that you have 0 or a very small number of qualifying payments, but please don't panic if that happens to you, okay? Once the adjustment is applied to your account, which again, could take any time between now till roughly September of 2024, you should get the PSLF qualifying payments back and updates to your PSLF qualifying accounts once that adjustment is applied on your studentaid.gov account, okay? On the other hand, let's just say that you decide to wait and apply to consolidate your loans on or after July 1st, 2024. It is possible that the new consolidated loan will not be credited as generously, right? It will only be credited, it may only be credited with a weighted average of those qualifying loans made to direct loans included in the consolidation, meaning the weighted average is not going to include any payments to FEL or Perkins loans, and it's likely not going to give you 100% of your PSLF credit, right? So in short, this means that if you're considering consolidating, you really want to do it before June 30th, 2024 to maximize your benefits under this account adjustment.
All right, thanks, Jessica. And we're almost to the end of the presentation, so bear with us. And actually, just on a side note, as far as the consolidation under the IDR account adjustment, it really does work if you've got, for instance, right, those different payment amounts. I can personally vouch for that. So, all right, well, there's just a couple more items we're going to cover before we jump into questions. So, as you are probably aware, right, there's a lot of things happening in the student loan world. And so I want to just quickly highlight a couple of those changes for you. Right now, a program called Fresh Start is happening, in which folks that maybe are in default on their direct loans can get out of that default and make them eligible for financial aid if they plan on attending school again. This Fresh Start program is currently in effect through September 30th, 2024. So if you do have loans in default, please look into that as soon as possible. There is a new income-driven repayment plan called SAVE, or Saving on a Valuable Education, which is the newest, most generous repayment plan. You've probably heard about it in the news quite a bit. This particular plan is going to increase the discretionary income exemption from 150 to 225% of the poverty line. What that means is essentially more of your income would be protected, generally allowing for lower monthly payments. Additionally, folks who had a lower original loan balance may start to see forgiveness after 10 years or more in repayment. So we encourage you to check out the SAVE webpage linked on the slide and dropped in the chat to learn more about that program. MOHELA is changing website platforms. If MOHELA is currently your servicer, you might have already received or will receive in the next few weeks notice of transition from MOHELA that they're about to transition your student loans in your account to a new platform. You'd also be notified by MOHELA when the transition is complete and when your loan information has been uploaded into that new system. This is not a change in servicer, it's a change in like your web access to your account at MOHELA. We encourage you to closely read each notice that you receive about the transition, especially any instructions you receive that you may need to follow to get your new account set up and make sure that transition is complete. Finally, there are a few major servicer transitions that have or are happening. If you are impacted by a loan transfer from one servicer to another, I recommend reviewing FSA's blog post on what's next after a student loan transfer. Again, that link is going to be on the slide and also dropped in the chat. As we move to the end of the presentation, we're going to highlight a couple of resources to help you navigate your student loans and apply for the PSLF program. First, our office's PSLF website has a document on steps to apply. As you might expect, it has step-by-step instructions to apply for the PSLF. It's a great document, especially for those who are starting from scratch when it comes to PSLF, but also those who maybe are already in the program and want to make sure that they don't miss any of those steps. Also, our PSLF frequently asked questions document, as well as other helpful links and resources, are all available on our website, wasac.wa.gov/PSLF. So check it out. If you have specific questions about your case, or maybe you would like to submit a complaint about your student loan servicer, please use our complaints and questions form available at studentcomplaints.wa.gov. Make sure to select the student loan questions and complaints form. Please note that it's currently taking us probably around 4 weeks or so to respond to questions and complaints submitted. Jessica is going to share that link to the PSLF webpage in the chat where you can access all of those resources.
And just to kind of go on what Amber's saying, you can definitely submit individual requests for assistance using that website. Just know that if you're asking questions about consolidation, we may not get back to you before June 30th, right? So you want to be aware of that and hopefully make a decision between now and then about consolidation, because it's possible that we might not get back to you before that deadline. So I just want to highlight that.
Thanks, Jess. Thank you for the opportunity for us to present to you today. We have a survey we'd encourage you to fill out to help us continue providing resources for Washington State student loan borrowers. The link is in the chat. Let's let us know how we're doing, how we can help. And also just a reminder that of the survey from earlier, we're collecting information about how PSLF is impacting student loan borrowers in our state. Okay. All right, so we're going to be diving into the questions. Jessica, I realized that we didn't activate the upvote function, so I'm going to kind of go through and hit on some of the what I think are probably the most important questions that are being asked. And so if you haven't asked your question,
I'm going to try to enable that function so that people can do that.
Okay. All right. While that's happening, I'm going to go ahead and take a look here.
All right, so everybody, I have enabled the upvote function, right? So I'm going to change slides here real quick so you can see kind of how it works. So now you should be able to see a little thumbs up next to every single question that was submitted. We have a lot of questions, right, that are going to be, that have been asked, and we likely are not going to have enough time, right, to go over all of them. So if you see a question and you really want that answered, please hit the thumbs up, right, on that question, and that will help us know that this is a question that a lot of people want to know about. And if you don't know where to access your Q&A function, there should be a little button on your Zoom menu that says Q&A, and then you're going to have the option to thumbs up. So if you can do that, we would really appreciate it.
Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive in. Here is a great question. Do you have a pulse on how long the consolidation process takes? If I start today, will I make it by June 30th? And so with that one, so when we talk about applying to consolidate, what you have to get in by June 30th is the initial application. So you need that in by June 30th. The process itself takes about 6 to 8 weeks to actually complete, but you would need to get that application submitted before June 30th. I'm going to pause just for a second here.
Sorry, I had to get the door real quick. Thank you.
You're good. Okay. All right. So let's see. Checking the upvotes. Some of the wording around forgiveness has made it sound like I won't qualify for any forgiveness because I hold a Perkins loan. Well, will my other loans be forgiven, or am I SOL because I hold a Perkins loan in addition to direct loans? That is a phenomenal question. Thank you for asking it. Jessica, do you want to take it or do you want me? I'll go. Okay, perfect. So As we mentioned, right now, up until June 30th, you have the opportunity to consolidate your loans. So you can consolidate your Perkins loan with your direct loans to put them on the same forgiveness timeline. And so we would recommend that you would do that if you want to make sure that you're going to receive PSLF for your Perkins loan in addition to your direct loans. If you didn't consolidate them, you still could pursue PSLF for your direct loans, but you would then still be responsible for paying the Perkins loan and wouldn't have that forgiveness option.
Perfect. So I'm just making sure that I'm not going by the most upvote since we have people starting to do that function. So my loan was transferred from Mohila to Ed Financial, and I no longer see how many payments I have are going towards PSLF. Is this information going to be available again? Yes, Dana. That information will eventually be available on the studentaid.gov website, right? But it's not going to be available until about sometime in July. So you will be able to access that information again. You just have to wait a little bit longer before it becomes available once again on studentaid.gov.
All right, let's see. I used the PSLF tool to submit the form. It was sent to my employer for digital signature, but it expired because they didn't sign within 3 days. The instructions say I now have to use the paper form. Should I restart the form to have it sent via DocuSign again? Jessica, do you want to take this one?
Sorry, I missed it. What's the question again?
Yeah, so I used the PSLF tool to submit the form. It was sent to my employer for digital signature, but it expired because they didn't sign within 3 days. The instructions say I now have to use the paper form. Should I restart the form to have it sent via DocuSign again?
Yes, that is what I would recommend that you do, right? And give your employer a heads up that you're sending the form, right? Because it shouldn't be expiring in 3 days. It should give the employer a little bit more time to do that. But we recommend that whenever you submit that you give a heads up to your employer so that they can know to expect the form and hopefully be able to sign it in time. So yeah, in your situation, I would recommend that you use the PSLF help tool again to generate a new form, right? And then hopefully that one will get signed in time by your employer.
All right. So our next kind of voted, my account seems to be off by almost a year worth of payments, despite always being on auto pay and an IDR plan. Will this potentially be adjusted in the adjustment period? Do I need to submit for the adjustment opportunity? So we would first recommend that you make sure that you have submitted a PSLF form for all of your employment, including that time period that that you're missing, to make sure that that information like is all on file, because that's going to be what determines the qualifying payments is that employment. If you know for sure that all of your employment is already submitted and you're still missing that period, we would recommend then waiting to see if the adjustment then fixes that for you. It's not something you need to apply for. The adjustment would just occur, and you wouldn't even necessarily be notified that it's occurred, but when that information becomes available on studentaid.gov for your PSLF information, you could kind of visually see that information. And if it's still not fixed at the point that the adjustment is finished at the end of September, then you could do the reconsideration process. So you have that time period reconsidered. So there's kind of a series of things that you could do or need to wait on. But I would say start with verifying that employment.
All right, we do have somebody that submitted an anonymous question that is very detailed to their specific situation, right? So we're really only answering general questions today. If you have a very specific circumstance that needs to be addressed, and this is, even though they submitted as an anonymous attendee, they did include their email address. Please don't submit any personal information, right? Here, because we want to make sure that none of this gets publicized. So I'm going to send you a private message using the Q&A, but please note that we're only answering general questions, right? If your situation is very specific, please submit a complaint and/or a question to studentcomplaints.wa.gov. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Jessica. Angela writes, my loans are over 20 years old. Where do I go to get the automatic forgiveness? So that is a great question, Angela. So the first thing we would want you to do is to take a look at your loans and determine what types of loans they are. If they are direct loans or if they are FEL loans. So FFEL, FFELP. If you see that anywhere in your loans, in order to qualify for the IDR account adjustment, you would have to consolidate those older loans into direct loans. And for that, we've got the links in the chat regarding the IDR account adjustment. We also have that link to the IDR account adjustment webinar that goes over that in more detail. Jessica, did you want to add anything to that one?
Yes, it's also important to know that the 20 to 25 year timeline for people that are not currently in IDR depends on the kinds of loans that you took out, right? So 20 years is only for people that have undergraduate only loans. If you have any graduate loans, then you're really looking at a 25-year timeline to get forgiveness. So that's also important to be aware of. And once again, like Amber said, recommend that you check that you actually have the right loans, right, to be able to benefit from the IDR account adjustment. And if for some reason you have any graduate loans, right, and you know that you're going to be under the 25-year timeline, you want to make sure that you enter an income-driven repayment plan, apply for IDR to make sure that you continue making progress, right, towards that forgiveness. So those are the two pieces of advice that I would give to you.
And I would add to that as well, that it's not just about the amount of time period that's passed since you took out the loans. It also depends on your repayment history. So for instance, there are certain periods, folks, if they were in, like, say, bankruptcy for a period of time, that period of time wouldn't count towards that 25 years for forgiveness. So it's not just strictly about the amount of time, but also your repayment history as well. All right, let's see here. When I submit the PSLF annually to certify employment with the same employer, what do I put as the beginning employment date? Okay, and then they just gave an example. So we would generally recommend you always just put the beginning date as when you started employment, because you're just verifying the length of time that you've been there. So even though, yes, you're submitting a new one to get the more recent months counted, I would always just put your original beginning employment date.
Perfect. So next question is, I remember submitting my employer 1 year, perhaps it's both years. How can I tell if it's up to date? I would recommend that if you're not sure, just resubmit the forms, right? You don't want to take any chances. You want to make sure that it's updated. So if you're not sure, just resubmit the employment certification with that employer again. That would be my recommendation.
All right. The next person, I have periods of deferment while in school that I believe won't count. I was working in public service and was wondering if I should seek IDR. So I'm thinking they're talking about the IDR account adjustment rather than applying for an IDR plan. But so typically, right, periods of deferment while in school, those are not going to count even if you have qualifying employment during that period. And that won't change even under the IDR account adjustment. And remember, the IDR account adjustment, if it ends up applying to you, would happen automatically. It's not something that you need to apply for separately.
Perfect. If we consolidate it in order to get credits, how is the interest rate calculated? My older loans have a better interest rates and the newer loans are almost double. So I think I'd end up paying more money through the higher interest rate. Good question. So whenever you consolidate your loans, what ends up being your new interest rate on the new loans is a weighted average between all of your interest rates, right? So it's not going to be as low as the lower interest rates that you have on your older loans, but it's also not going to be as high as the interest rates that you currently have. It's going to be a number somewhere in the middle, depending on the loan balances for each loan, right, and their interest rates. So it's going to be basically a weighted average, right? So it's not going to increase necessarily your interest rate. It's just going to be a weighted average of those interest rates. The other thing to be aware of, right, is that if you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness and you are in an income-driven repayment plan, the interest rate doesn't really matter that much, just because you basically are going to get forgiveness on any balance that you have, right, at the point that you reach that 120 qualifying payment. So for most people that are under PSLF and are pursuing PSLF, typically interest rates are not too much of a concern, because hopefully you're going to get, you know, your balance forgiven after 120 qualifying payments. So hopefully you're not going to end up paying more overall.
And I would add too that, remember, with IDR plans, your payment is going to be based on your income and your family size, not on your loan balance or your loan interest rate. So it's whatever interest rate you have, it's not going to affect your monthly payment if you're under an IDR plan. Okay, next question. If applicable, do you recommend consolidation? I was always told not to. Are there drawbacks to consolidating now? So it depends on your situation. If all of your loans, let's say all of your loans are already direct loans and they're all from undergrad and they all entered repayment at the same time period, I would say that there's not a reason necessarily to consolidate, unless you just want to, you know, see less information on your accounts and stuff when you log in, rather than having, you know, 10 or 12 different loans or whatever it may be. But if one of the situations that we talked about earlier applies to you, so if you have loans from undergrad and then maybe you had some qualifying PSLF employment after undergrad, and then you went back to grad school and took out more loans, right? And those loans would be on different repayment timelines. That would be a good reason to consolidate. If you have loans that don't generally apply for PSLF, like Perkins, you know, that might be a reason to consolidate if you have older FFEL loans. So, I mean, it really is situation specific.
Yeah, and I'm just going to return to that slide once again, right? Because this is primarily the people that want to consolidate, right? If you don't fall under one of these three categories, you don't necessarily need to consolidate your loans. So hopefully this also helps shed a little bit more light on the consolidation question.
And Jessica, do you mind actually finding the benefits and drawbacks of consolidating that article? We could link to that as well.
Yeah, but that article is not very good. Currently, I don't know if you remember that there's some stuff in it that's confusing to people. So I prefer that people actually look at the slide, see if your situation falls under one of these three, right? If it doesn't, most likely you don't need to consolidate. If it does, then likely you need to consolidate before June 30th.
All right, so the next question. Yeah, so, and this actually is kind of related. So studentaid.gov states that the cons of consolidation is loss of payments to our IDR forgiveness. So why would I consolidate? So, and this is where that information is out of date, because that is the information prior to the current IDR account adjustment opportunity. And that, like, even when you go into the consolidation application, it also tells you you would lose payments, and that information is wrong. Right now, if you do that consolidation before June 30th, you would not lose that time towards IDR or PSLF forgiveness.
And I'm happy to post a link to the IDR account adjustment website that confirms this information, right? Because I know that there's conflicting information on studentaid.gov that can lead people to make decisions that end up not being, you know, optimal for them. But the information on the IDR account adjustment page explains this, right? That you're not going to lose credit. So I'm going to go ahead and post that in the chat for anybody who wants to, like, really confirm that the information that we're sharing with you today is true.
All right. Paula asks, I already have over 10 years repayment and over 10 years with government full-time employment. Will I then be eligible for PSLF? From just that basic information, it sounds like it. The best way to determine that would be to go ahead and submit those PSLF forms using the help tool for all your employers. If you worked, all within the same agency for those 10 years, you would just submit one. But if you work with different government agencies, you would need to submit separate forms for each of them. That's going to give you the best answer as to, are you eligible for forgiveness at this time?
All right, so is applying for, I think they're meaning PSLF, the same as the yearly employment verification form? Yes. So before 2020, you used to have to submit different forms, one to certify your employment and one to apply for forgiveness. But now the same form is used for both things. So when you use the PSLF help tool and you to apply for PSLF and or update your employment certification information, it's doing both things. So great question.
All right, so next question. If I paid off my undergraduate loans before attending graduate school, do those payments count towards IDR repayment, or do I have to start the clock all over again? So great question. Unfortunately, if you've already paid off those loans, the time period that you spent in repayment on those loans would not apply to your new loans. So if you have all fresh loans, your clock towards PSLF forgiveness or IDR forgiveness would start with those new loans as they've entered repayment.
All right, so someone said, wait, what? Did she just say that forgiveness for graduate degree loans is 25 years? So this is where people get a little bit confused, right? So we've talked about two different types of forgiveness today. Primarily public service loan forgiveness, which regardless of what kind of loan you have, is going to take 10 years, right? So 10 years of making qualifying payments while working for a qualifying public service employer, right? The timeline for PSLF does not change whether you have graduate loans or undergraduate loans. Now, if you're getting forgiveness under IDR, which is a different type of forgiveness, right? Based on the period of time that you've been on an IDR, and or because maybe you've been in repayment, right, for already 25 years on your graduate loans, then you're going to get forgiveness under IDR for after 25 years. Now, for most people, they're going to get their PSLF if they continue working in public service way faster, right, than they would get IDR forgiveness. But for the folks that have been in repayment for a really long time, right, those folks in the 20 to 25 years category, they could very well be closer to getting forgiveness under that type of forgiveness. So that's the reason why we mentioned that. But if you're under PSLF, the number of years that you have to be both employed and making qualifying payments is 120 qualifying payments. I just want to make sure that that's clear.
All right, so the next question, I was working 35 hours at a school district and they put down that I was working part-time on the paperwork. What do I do in this case? I didn't know I was considered part-time after working there for 5 years. I reached out to federal student aid and after almost a month wait, they responded but didn't answer the question. So previous to the 2023 rule changes that we covered, employers they would mark whether you were full-time or part-time, right? And it was based on what they determined full-time or part-time is. That has changed, right? So as long as you were working 30 hours or more on average, it doesn't matter whether the employer considered it full-time or part-time. So what I would suggest doing is using the help tool, go ahead and submit it. As long as the hours show that it was a 35-hour per week average, it should then be qualifying.
And if you run into any issues with that, please once again consider submitting a request for assistance for us, and that is at studentcomplaints.wa.gov. I have reposted those links once again in the chat, just in case you or anybody else wants to access that.
All right, this next question is a great one. Does one need to be employed at the time submitting an application to add eligible employment towards PSLF? And does one need to be employed by an eligible employer at the time of the application is approved? Example, if I submit an application while working for an eligible employer, but leave employer before the application is approved, what happens? So this is a great question. So when it comes to certifying employment, if you're no longer working with an eligible employer, or you submit the application and you're just working to make sure that those months of qualifying payments are counted, it's fine if you're not working at that employer anymore. But when it comes to, if you get to the point where you're at 120 payments and you're like, okay, well, I know I'm eligible for forgiveness, I'm going to submit the form and indicate, yes, I've made 120 payments. Please consider my application for forgiveness. That you absolutely have to still be employed by a qualifying employer in order to receive that forgiveness. And that's why we recommend not leaving a public service employer until after you receive forgiveness, not just applied for forgiveness, but receive the forgiveness.
Perfect. Another question. Can I make one $0 payment and then additional payments or more in 1 month to count towards 2 payments? No, you can't, right? The idea behind the program is to have you work 10 years in the qualifying in the public sector while making payments. Therefore, there's no way for you to speed up the process, right? It's going to take you at least 10 years to get PSLF forgiveness, and there's no way to get that faster in the sense that, like, there's no way to do more than one qualifying payment a month.
All right. If I were working for a qualified employer prior to taking out the loan, will that service still count, or does the service have to occur after taking out the loan? Great question. There tends to be a lot of confusion on this, but the employment has to occur while you're actively in repayment on the loan generally, right? So if you're employed first and then you take a break and go to school, and that prior employment was maybe a public service employer, that employment wouldn't count because your loans wouldn't yet have been in repayment where you're making those qualifying monthly payments. So it's not just that you're working for 10 years in public service, right? It's those qualifiers of in the right repayment plan, the number of hours per week while your loan is in repayment.
And yes, while the IDR account adjustment is going to allow you to get credit for several periods of time that typically wouldn't count, right, towards PSLF, it still means that you would have to be basically after you stopped attending school. That's probably the best way for people to understand. At the moment that you stop attending school, after your grace period ends, that's typically when you're actually going to be able to start collecting qualifying payments, right? That's probably the easiest way for people to understand that requirement.
All right, and I know we're getting close to time here, so I want to, before we answer any more questions, I want to put a plug here for our upcoming event later this month. So we recognize that the Q&A sessions that we have at the end of our PSLF presentation is not enough time to answer all of these types of questions. And so if we haven't gotten to your question yet, I recommend that you copy them down and save them because at the end of this month on June 27th, from noon to 1:30, so the same time period again, we are going to have an open PSLF Q&A forum. So basically just answering questions like these live rather than having a presentation first. We might cover just a couple of things in a really short presentation, but in general, it's going to be an open Q&A for general type questions that could apply to other folks, right? Again, if you have very specific personal circumstances that require a lot of detailed explanation of your, of those personal circumstances, that would be better done through our form and reaching out to our office through that way. But with a lot of these general questions, we are going to have that webinar. We are going to be sending out information on that next week to all of our subscribed folks on our email subscription. And just by registering for this webinar, you are automatically put onto our email subscription list. So that information will go out to you next week. And we're also going to put it in the follow-up to this event where you'll get the slides and the presentation recording as well. Jessica, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's great. Yeah. So if you didn't get your question answered today, we recommend that you attend that Q&A. We're going to have a lot more time allotted to specifically answering questions. So
All right. Let's see. I think we're at time. So,
I think we can answer a couple more questions, right?
couple more. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Paula asked, I have a loan on the 30-year repayment plan. If I switch my plan, how do I make the previous payments eligible for PSLF? So that is a great question. So yes, please do make sure moving forward to get onto an IDR plan. So future payments will be eligible for PSLF. But through the IDR account adjustment, which is going to happen automatically, those prior payments where you were on that 30-year standard repayment plan would count as eligible for PSLF once you have employment for that period certified. So if you haven't had your employment certified yet for that period, you can get that PSLF application in. Sorry, there was a question earlier, I think, that asked if the certification form and the application for forgiveness form are the same thing. Yes, they are. So you would just submit that form for that employment period, and then by roughly the end of September, I would expect to see that information updated with the conclusion of the IDR account adjustment.
Yeah, and I just want to add, you do want to make sure that your loans are direct, right? Just because you could be potentially on a 30-year repayment plan under a FEL consolidation loan, right? So make sure that your loans are direct before you switch into an IDR, because again, the loans need to be direct and you might need to consolidate. So just make sure that you double check that information if you're not sure if they're direct loans.
Erin, thank you for reminding folks, if you have worked for the state or a public institution of higher education, you do need a separate form for each agency, even though you are working for the state. They each have separate EIN numbers, so they would need separate forms. All right. I'm having a hard time understanding the maximum amount of PSLF if you are on an IDR plan. Jessica spoke about this a bit, but I really didn't understand. If you have the lowest payment possible in IDR, then it maximizes the amount of PSLF you can get.
Yes. So you understood it. You said you didn't understand, but you understood it. So yes, typically for most people, the lowest payment that you can get under an income-driven repayment plan is going to maximize the amount of forgiveness that you get through PSLF. Now, there's no maximum amount of PSLF, right? It doesn't matter if I have $10,000 left after I made 120 qualifying payments, or $500,000 in a balance once I hit that 120 qualifying payment, right? Whatever the balance is at that time that you hit those 120 qualifying payments, that's what's going to get forgiven, right? So the way that you typically maximize that is, again, by signing up for the lowest income-driven repayment plan that you can qualify for.
I think we answered this one already, but how do we get the count adjustment? If you have direct loans, it would happen automatically if you're affected by it. Not everybody will receive an adjustment based on it. It depends on their repayment history and the loans that they have. Again, the most important thing though is making sure that you do have direct loans in order to be eligible for the adjustment. So if you have older FEL loans, those would need to be consolidated. And again, that means submitting the consolidation application prior to June 30th in order to be considered for the account adjustment. And folks, that deadline is basically a guarantee that loans consolidated would be considered for the adjustment at that point. If folks were to consolidate after that point, they might still be considered if the consolidation finishes before the account adjustment finishes. But that June 30th is like you'd be considered at that point for it. So, yeah.
All right, and we're just going to answer really a couple more here. But PSLF won't accept one of the nonprofit EIN numbers my parents are entering. And I'm guessing that maybe your parents work in the public sector and they have their own loans, right? That's what I'm going to assume based on the information that you put in here. They've talked to the Secretary of State to figure this out, and they said that it is correct. What should be my next step? Have your parents or whoever holds this loan, right, submit a question and or a complaint on our student complaints portal, which is studentcomplaints.wa.gov. That's already posted in the chat, right? That's what I would recommend that they do, so we can look into what's happening with that specific EIN for you.
And I'll add to that too, if it's for a nonprofit, as you mentioned, so 501c3 nonprofits, those nonprofits automatically are eligible for PSLF. If they worked for a nonprofit that has a different tax code, they may need to provide additional documentation in order to have their employment considered qualifying. So we can help you figure out what that documentation might be. Amira says, one of my previous employers refuses to certify my time with them, so it can be added to my qualifying payments. I've tried to reach out twice with no success. What else can I do? Great question. First, if you haven't tried using the PSLF help tool, that would be my first recommendation, would be to try it that way. And if they still refuse at that point, even after you've notified them that you're sending them that way, I would have you reach out to our office so that we can help navigate that with you.
And again, reaching out to our office means submitting a request for assistance form or a complaint form at studentcomplaints.wa.gov.
Okay. Do we need to go and consolidate our loans with our student loan provider before applying with PSLF? No. That would only be true if your loans are not direct loans that need to be consolidated, right? So if you have Perkins loans, Fell loans, HEAL loans, those would need to be consolidated before you would apply for PSLF. If you only have direct loans, you can start, submitting PSLF forms if you want right away.
And then someone asked, do we need to certify the PSLF eligibility of a season of forbearance that might count towards the IDR adjustment before the June 30th, 2024 deadline? No, right? So if there's a period of time, for example, that you were in a forbearance, that gets to count as IDR payments as a result of the adjustment, you don't need to submit that PSLF form before the deadline. I would recommend that you do it sooner rather than later, obviously, right? Because the faster you submit, the faster you hopefully get that information updated. But no, you could submit it later and still get the credit. And I'm talking specifically here about the PSLF application, right? The PSLF form. If you need to consolidate again, that needs to happen before June 30th. Like the application needs to be submitted before June 30th, 2024. And then someone asked, can I consolidate loans that have not gone into repayment status yet? If you have already stopped attending school or graduated, yes. So like if you're in your grace period, you can. If you're still attending school, then no, right? You're gonna have to wait at least until you either graduate or stop attending school and enter your grace period before you're able to consolidate those loans. So this is really the last one, everybody. How soon can you apply for PSLF if you're in grad school, towards graduation, after graduation? I just explained that, right? The soonest you could apply for PSLF would be if you decide to consolidate right after graduation. You're going to be able to enter repayment right away, right? So that could actually be a way to skip your grace period. It's to like, as soon as you graduate, go ahead and apply to consolidate your loans, and then that would allow you to enter repayment right away. Otherwise, if you don't want to consolidate after you graduate, then you're going to have to wait until the end of your grace period, which is roughly 6 months before you can start accruing PSLF qualifying payments. So that's when you would want to apply, submit your PSLF form.
All right, so that's all we have time for. Again, we encourage you to look out for the information we're going to be sending about our later PSLF Q&A forum at the end of this month. Also, in the meantime, highly encourage you to check out the resources on our website, including our steps to apply, our frequently asked questions, and fact sheet. And we've also got some great links on there to information on the FSA website as well.
And just one more time, again, I know that we've asked this, but there is a survey on the chat that we've posted for you to let us know how we're doing. If you could please take the time to just do this before you're done with the presentation today, would really appreciate it. But otherwise, again, all of the links are in the chat. They will also be emailed to you once we send out the slides about a week from today. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure having you all here today. I hope to see a lot of you during our Q&A session, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.